The last thing I remember before the world declared me dead was the sound of twisted metal and rushing water. 3 months later, I pushed open the doors of the church where my own funeral memorial was being held. My wife screamed. My brother turned as white as the flowers beside my photograph. Then I noticed something that chilled me even more than the accident itself. Nobody looked happy to see me alive. If you've ever believed your family would never betray you, I hope you never have to learn the truth the way I did. The people, names, and places in this story are fictional, and the visuals shown are simply illustrations to help tell the story. My name is Michael Turner. I'm 64 years old, a retired bridge inspector from Montana. My wife, Linda, and I have been married for 36 years. We had one daughter, Emma, and I thought our family was as solid as the mountains surrounding our hometown. 3 months before that day, I was driving home after spending the weekend fishing alone. Rain poured so heavily that visibility disappeared. A pickup truck suddenly crossed into my lane. I swerved, crashed through a guardrail, and my truck plunged into an icy river. When I woke up, I wasn't in a hospital. I was in a small cabin miles away. An elderly couple had pulled me from the water. I had suffered a severe head injury. For weeks, I couldn't even remember my own name. They cared for me without asking for anything in return. Little by little, my memory returned. The first name I remembered was Linda, then Emma, then home. The couple insisted I see a doctor before traveling. By the time I was healthy enough to leave, nearly 3 months had passed. I imagined Linda crying tears of joy when she saw me. I imagined Emma running into my arms. Instead, as I drove into town, I saw my own face on a large banner outside our church. In loving memory of Michael Turner. I thought it had to be a mistake. I parked across the street and quietly walked inside. At the front of the church stood a large portrait of me surrounded by white lilies. The pastor was speaking. Linda sat in the front row dressed in black. Beside her sat my younger brother, David. As I took one slow step down the aisle, the pastor looked up. His Bible slipped from his hands. Every head in the church turned toward me. The room fell completely silent. Then my brother whispered, just loudly enough for me to hear, "He's not supposed to be alive, Michael." Linda's voice barely escaped her lips. She looked as though she had seen a ghost. I wanted to run to her, but something stopped me. It wasn't the shock on her face. It was my brother David. Instead of looking relieved, he looked terrified. He slowly backed away from the casket that held my photograph. "That's impossible," he muttered. You're dead." The pastor finally broke the silence. "Michael, is that really you?" I nodded. "I'm alive." Within seconds, the church erupted into confusion. People stood from their seats. Some cried. Others rushed toward me, hugging me and asking where I had been. I tried to answer as calmly as I could. There was an accident. I lost my memory for a while. An elderly couple rescued me and cared for me until I recovered. Linda threw her arms around me. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. "I thought I'd lost you forever." I held her tightly. So did I. But David never came near me. He quietly slipped toward the back exit. I noticed him leaving. "David." He froze. "Where are you going?" He forced a smile. I just need some air." Before he could leave, Sheriff Collins stepped inside the church. He had obviously heard the commotion. After confirming I was alive, he smiled with relief. "Well, Michael, I never thought I'd be welcoming someone back from their own memorial service." Then his expression became serious. "I'll need you to come by the station later today." "Why?" "Because after your accident, several legal documents were filed in your name." I frowned. "What documents?" "The transfer of your lakeside cabin, your investment accounts, and partial ownership of your family business." I stared at him. "I never signed anything." "I was afraid you'd say that." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw David's face lose all its color. Sheriff Collins continued. "The signatures looked legitimate." "They aren't." He slowly nodded. "That's exactly why we opened an investigation." David suddenly interrupted. "There must be some mistake." The sheriff looked directly at him. "We'll determine that soon enough." As everyone began leaving the church, Sheriff Collins quietly handed me a folder. Inside was a copy of the documents supposedly bearing my signature. I turned to the final page. The witness signature made my heart stop. The witness wasn't a stranger. It was my own wife, Linda. I looked up at her. She was already crying before I asked the question that neither of us was prepared to answer. Linda, why is your name on these papers? Linda's hands trembled as she looked at the signature. I didn't know what I was signing, she whispered. The church had nearly emptied by then. Only Sheriff Collins, 2 deputies, David, and a few close relatives remained. What do you mean? I asked. Tears streamed down Linda's face. David came to me 2 weeks after your accident. He said the insurance company needed emergency paperwork, so I could pay the mortgage and your medical bills. I trusted him. She looked directly at me. I never read the documents. I turned toward my brother. Is that true? David crossed his arms. She signed them willingly. The sheriff stepped forward. Mr. Turner, we'd like everyone to continue this conversation at the station. An hour later, investigators spread every document across a conference table. A forensic handwriting expert entered carrying a report. We've completed a preliminary examination. Everyone became silent. The signatures claiming to be Michael Turner's were traced from older documents. I stared at David. He refused to look at me. The expert continued. There's more. He pointed to Linda's signature. Mrs. Turner signed only 1 page. What about the others? The sheriff asked. They were digitally copied onto multiple legal forms. Linda covered her mouth. Oh my God, she had been deceived too. David suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. You can't prove I did anything. The sheriff calmly placed another folder on the table. We searched your office this morning. My brother's confidence disappeared. Inside the folder were photographs of a scanner, signature templates, and draft copies of the forged property documents. Then came the final piece of evidence. The sheriff pressed play on a security video recovered from a local print shop. The footage clearly showed David printing the forged documents only days after everyone believed I had died. No one spoke. Finally, David lowered his head. I was tired of living in your shadow, he said quietly. I thought, if everyone believed you were gone, nobody would ever question it. I felt anger, sadness, and disbelief all at once. You weren't stealing my property, I said. You were stealing my family's trust. The sheriff placed David under arrest without another word. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me. I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't answer. Some betrayals are too deep for words. But one question still remained. If Linda had truly been deceived, who had convinced the insurance company and the bank that I was officially dead before my body had ever been found? Months passed before the entire truth finally came to light. David accepted a plea agreement and admitted he had forged my signature, stolen company records, and attempted to transfer my property while everyone believed I was dead. But he wasn't the mastermind behind everything. During the investigation, detectives discovered that an insurance claims manager had ignored several missing person procedures and approved paperwork that should never have been processed. He was later dismissed and faced criminal charges for falsifying official records in exchange for money. When I heard that, I felt sick. A stranger's greed had given my own brother the opportunity to betray me. The court eventually canceled every forged transfer. My home, my cabin, my savings, and every piece of property were legally returned to me. The judge looked directly at David before announcing his sentence. Mr. Turner, you did not simply steal money. You tried to erase your own brother's life while he was still alive. The courtroom fell silent. David lowered his head. For the first time since I had walked into my own memorial service, I saw genuine regret in his eyes. After the hearing, he asked if he could speak to me. We stood alone outside the courthouse. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I only want you to know, I hated living in your shadow. I looked at him for a long moment. You were never in my shadow. He looked confused. I always believed we were standing side by side. Tears filled his eyes. He nodded once before deputies led him away. Linda and I faced a different challenge. Trust doesn't return overnight. For months, we attended counseling together. She blamed herself for signing papers without reading them. I blamed myself for believing nothing could ever divide our family. Little by little, we learned to forgive each other. Not because forgetting was easy, but because holding on to anger was destroying what we still had left. 1 year later, our daughter Emma gathered the family at the lake where my accident had happened. She planted a small oak tree near the riverbank. This tree is for new beginnings, she said. As we stood together watching the sun set over the water,